Welcome, everyone, to In the Driver's Seat, the podcast that's all about exploring how to improve the value of your business, helping business owners positioning themselves for a successful exit. My name is Simon Zryd, and together with Steven Kohnke, we co-host this podcast. We're both partners at Denver Business Coach. We're both certified exit planning advisors and certified value builders, and have worked with business owners in that field of value building and exit planning for close to a decade now. Our podcast aims to make this discussion of building a valuable, sellable business more accessible to business owners well before they plan to sell. And our goal is really to introduce this conversation years in advance. And the reason for that and the reason for this podcast and this conversation is because of a few statistics that we think really ought to change. And I'll let Steven introduce those statistics to you.
Right. So they should change, and that's our mission. That's why we're around here. Uh, the reality that business owners are faced with nowadays is, 3 out of 4 businesses that go to market don't actually sell. If they are selling, they're selling at a much lower rate or a much lower price rather, than the business owner actually needs to be able to fund whatever they're planning on doing next, whether that's retirement or investments or what have it be. That stat coupled with 70 to 90% of business owners' overall wealth is their business. So if you're not going to sell it, or you're not going to sell it for the amount that you need to, you're putting up to 90% of your wealth, depending on what your assets look like, at risk by not preparing your business in a way to be sold.
Mm-hmm. One of the things before we get into the topic of today's conversation, that I just had 2 conversations this last week where business owners almost get to the end of their journey of business ownership, and they're just too exhausted to even engage in the conversation of what is it going to take to position a business for an exit. And I think that's one of the dangers, right? If you're going all the way to the finish line and then you think it's going to be an easy transition out, that can really get to you, and you want to make sure you have some gas in the tank before you really are looking to exit, because that's going to be a process. It's going to take a while, which we've talked about on this podcast.
Yeah. It's not like, so that's the comparison I use is selling a house, right? And a lot of business owners think it's like putting your house up for the market. Someone's going to snatch it up and walk away with some cash, and it's not how it works.
Not how it works. And I think today's topic is tying right into that, because over the last, I think, 3 weeks, we've talked about the more intangible side of things when it comes to business valuation. We've talked about the structural capital. We talked about the human capital. We talked about the customer capital. And today we're going to zoom in on the social capital. And again, through the lens of what is it? How does a buyer look at it? And then, what are some actionable steps that a business owner can take away to improve the value and the sellability of their company?
Mm-hmm.
So, like we talked about, like these concept of intangibles sometimes are a little hard to grasp. When we talk about social capital, how would we define that? What is it? What are we actually talking about here?
It's probably the most intangible component of these capitals. And it's culture is what it comes down to. If we're to describe it as something, it's what does the company feel like? What's the attitude within the company? How are people enjoying themselves to a degree? What type of people are attracted to your company? So certainly your culture has a huge effect on that. And social can also mean what are you doing? What is the company doing socially in the community as well? And that can have a big impact on your brands and things like that. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, we should focus, more internally on the culture of the company and how that really drives value, how it can drive value.
Mhm. And I think again, like even the word culture, right, is like hard to define. Like you almost have to break it down. Like, okay, what does good culture actually? What are some
Mhm.
representatives of good culture within a company? Um, so I think we all have a sense, or we can sense when there's a good culture,
Yeah.
right? And but again, as an owner, we always like to say, okay, like if you're 3 to 5 years out from an exit for when you want to sell your company, you usually start out with like an assessment of like, where's my company benchmarking at in these different areas? And so when it comes to social capital and culture, what are some areas to zoom in on to see how do I benchmark what my culture is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like putting intangibles in a tangible way. Being able to talk about, I think a big component of culture is vision, mission, core values. If you as a company, if the company is promoting and talking about and encouraging fulfilling values of the company, for instance, I think that on a regular basis, right? During team meetings, during quarterly reviews, or whatever it is, and uh, employees and people of the company are being uh, hired, fired, promoted based on how they are exemplifying those values within the company. I think that's a quantitative way to measure how serious the culture is of attracting the right type of person. So, again, how often are you talking about it? How is it being promoted? How are employees being evaluated on cultural components like vision, mission, values?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things when we work with business owners, and a lot of times, the structural capital, like the processes, the procedures, the documentation of things, that's like it's more accessible for people to
Mhm.
fill out. Here's how to do it. But then there comes a point where you cannot document every possible scenario
Yeah.
within a company, right? Like where you say, okay, at some point, does the team understand what the intent behind these processes is? And are they able to make the right decision in the absence of having a defined process? And to me, that's usually a really good indicator that people are not just learning the how, but the why behind it, and are able to access that. And then you can really focus on documenting the core processes, right? And then you can focus on even having more trust in your employees to do things. They become more proficient in what they're doing versus just constantly relying on having to document everything, having to have a top-down management style, right, and having be very time consuming in terms of um, what it takes to manage a team also, I guess. Anyway, that's one area that I can see when you can see the difference, people are making the right choices that are in alignment with the core values of the company, even if it's not in a process or procedure.
I think you said a key word there, alignment, right? If you as the company are talking about vision, mission, values, goals on a regular basis, people should be aligned with that, and whether they recognize it or not, be making decisions based on does this align with where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're in management or executive roles, being able to take ownership and make decisions based on what they know the business to be, what the culture is. I think that shows a very strong culture. And people buying a business want a strong culture. They want people who know what to do. So, I mean, I think you make a really good point on the alignment factor and decision making too.
I mean, and again, like looking through the lens of a potential buyer, maybe you're coming in with some different core values, or there's ideally there's an overlap there, or a congruent values at least to a high percentage. But sometimes what I also see is if you if your employees feel safe
Mhm.
to communicate, to give feedback, to bring forth ideas, uh, it actually helps the company in and of itself to be, and the people, it like utilizes the people potential and the human capital a lot more if the social capital and the if that's there, if the culture is there, you can utilize the people to a higher extent or capacity, essentially, because they show up more invested with more ownership, safer to talk about innovation, etc. And I think that's a good lens as a buyer. I would look at, is it a top down, or how engaged are the employees really in problem solving and bringing forth solutions as well. So how would you measure that? I guess one key metrics could be turnover, employee turnover.
Turnover. I think turnover would be a good one. Understanding, are you attracting the right type of person as an employee, right? People that do align with your culture. Um, I read something the other day of uh, a disclaimer that an executive had on their email signature, and it said, I'm going to paraphrase, if you're receiving this email outside of regular business hours, this is when it works for me to respond at a time that works best for you. It's showing that, and that from a cultural perspective, it's, hey, I'm emailing you at 9 p.m. at night because that's when my kids went to sleep and I can get to my emails. I'm not expecting you to email me
Mm-hmm.
back at 9 p.m. But I think some businesses have the culture of the expectation of you're always on.
Yeah.
And so being able to so getting back to kind of the retention thing, being able to find the right people that fit with the culture that you're trying to build. If you are a company that's, you're on the clock 24/7, you know, people are going to turn over that are not aligned with that type of workplace culture. And then vice versa is also true. So being able to measure cultural fit with your employees through way of retention or employee retention, I think is a good metric as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think, from a buyer perspective, for the most part, if you have a company with a sizable, team, one of the things initially is you want to maintain stability in the transition, right?
Mhm.
So the business is going to continue to perform in the way that it has performed, and then be able to grow on top of that. And if you have if you have strong social capital, that means your employees are stickier. There's less likely turnover, which is always a risk. A new owner comes in, it's a triggering event for employees to be like, well, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? Is there still opportunity for me or not? And so it can be a pretty risky time for a buyer to say, okay, am I going to be able to maintain current performance? And do I have the capacity, the money, etc., to rehire a team, which takes time, training, etc. So to me, this is like one of the biggest values from a buyer's perspective. Can I maintain a strong team that is producing outcomes and build on that, or is it at risk of kind of like falling apart? Especially in a time when every employee learns trade job as often as you can to make as much money as you can, right? And how do you keep a team together beyond that?
We put a panel together for the EPI Denver chapter a couple weeks ago, and it was all a bunch of M&A people and other consultants. And the topic was growth through acquisition or organic growth. And the main theme of it was culture fit. Was, if you're buying or selling whatever, in this particular case, we're talking about buying businesses, is if you're looking to acquire a business, it has to fit the culture that you have already built in order for, like within a strategic acquisition, for instance, if the culture isn't aligned, it's going to be so messy. So being able to understand cultural fit from company to company, and if they will actually mesh together, was a consensus across that panel of one of the most important things to look at.
Yeah.
Outside of financials, outside of profitability, outside of all that stuff, it's, will the two cultures actually meld together well?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I like that because even from a management leadership style, right? There's just different approaches, and
Mhm.
it's not necessarily the right or the wrong. There's like just different ways to go about it. But a leadership team that is used to having a lot of consensus or buy-in or open desk policies, open door policies, and all of that, and now you're the type of owner that's going to come in and has a different style, that might not go all that well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So far we've talked about the culture, employees really having a stability during the transition. How, that was more like inward facing. You also talked about an outward facing aspect of it in terms of
Mhm.
brand, for example. Um, what is there to look at as an owner looking to position my company for a sale? How do I assess my social capital more from an outside of the business perspective?
Outside looking at it, brand, I mean, being able to, I think we've talked about this in the past, being like socially conscious or caring about certain social components, you're going to build a particular following, which is a culture in itself. If you're saying, hey, we volunteer in the community, or we donate to XYZ Foundation, or, we care about um, some other social components, and take a stand on it, like Patagonia does, and some other bigger like brands like that. Um, that has an impact of your culture, because another, when we talk about social capital, it's what type of person are you attracting to, and that's going to, whether it's employee or customers on that end. So being able to say we care about XYZ, and then people are going to say, hey, I also care about that, let's talk. So that's another kind of outwardly facing way that you can look at social capital, I believe.
Yeah, like again, is it tied to having a more loyal customer base
I,
or
I think I mean, we're still kind of looking at, it's more about how are you viewed, how is your brand viewed in the community?
Mhm.
That's just has the social component of it.
Yeah,
So are you a brand that gets out there and gives back, for instance, or
yeah,
are you not, or however, whatever in between works for you, or what causes do you care about?
yeah,
That can be a part of your brand, that can be a part of the social awareness, social capital that your company can generate too.
generate. Because it's like these things where it can open doors,
Mhm.
beyond that if you don't have a good reputation or might not. Yeah, I can see that.
Mhm.
Um, okay, what else? Have we not touched something yet?
I think from a social capital component, I think those are the big categories. I think something to take away is this can take years to build, um, many years to build a reputation, to build, the right values, attract the right people, be able to have everything really mesh together. So, um, starting early and often, which is a theme across all preparing the business to be sold. But caring about those types of things, understanding what type of company you want to be, what type of people you want to attract, and go for it, and from an HR perspective, hire, fire, promote based on cultural components as well. I forget who talks about that um, out there, but it's not me that created that.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I had one client that really all the way to like the quarterly reviews of the employees, they were all tied to the core values
Yeah.
and matching up the job description with core values to then see how are you, you know, how are you performing in relationship to your job description and the core values, and what does it mean to be excelling at that? And I thought that was really a great exercise or great setup. And I think to your point, there is this time where as a business owner, you're so in the day to day that you don't really have time to foster this because you're still just needing the day to day to be taken care of. Versus if you can remove yourself, now you have time for like these more qualitative conversations to really listen, to empower your employees, to make them see that this is a place that they can grow and contribute more than just whatever their job description is. And um, that does take some time, but it's time well invested when it comes to an exit ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a couple for our listeners, a couple actionable steps from this conversation. I would say core values, right? You might have identified them, but really take a look at who on your team understands, is bought into the core values. How are they integrated? How are they lived outside of a poster on the wall? I think that's something really good. And then another one that I think is really important is to take an honest assessment of how much your employees are contributing to problem solving, to innovation, to bringing forth ideas. And just listen when you have your executive team meeting, when you have your operational meeting, whatever it is, how much is it still a top down, you're having the solution and they're implementing, versus really you're taking a step back and they're bringing solutions to the table. And then maybe one more. Do you have one more that we want to leave a business owner with?
Being able to integrate it. I mean, that's, to me, that's one of the bigger parts. Being able to actually, we take clients through core value exercises, mission, vision, stuff like that. But what we also talk about is talking about it. Like you said, how does it live outside of a poster? What are the actions that are actually being done individually and with the company? It's don't just talk about it, be about it type situation, and that's how you really foster a culture, identifying the type of culture you want to be,
Yeah.
and understanding how to facilitate that.
Great. Okay, good. I think that wraps up our conversation today. I think we've covered, this was the fourth of the intangible capitals. So we'll move on to a new topic next week. We hope that offered some valuable insights for you, maybe some new perspectives and some actionable takeaways from this episode. Again, our mission is to empower business owners and engage in the conversation around building a valuable, ultimately sellable company right now, rather than wait to the very end. Thank you, Steven, for another great conversation today. It's been a pleasure. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts or experience around this topic, want to leave a comment, or are wanting us to cover a particular topic that's on your mind, please let us know. And we'll see you hear you next week.
Great. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah. Bye.